Welcome. Today we are again speaking with Jamal Shah, who is an air expert. Jamal today will be giving us updates on flights to Australia, as well as talking about some destinations for folks who may be looking to either renew their E3 or get a new E3 that is not impacted by quarantine, is reasonably inexpensive, and relatively close to New York and other US cities. Jamal, welcome.
Thanks for having me, James.
Jamal, I know we spoke in depth in our last video about travel to Australia and some of the challenges for folks who were looking to get economy flights to Australia. Has there been much of an update since we spoke then?
So the caps have been increasing gradually, not really as with the speed that we've wanted. In terms of flights, it's pretty much staying where it is. So I know, last time we spoke of, obviously Delta and United being the two most consistent carriers, and that remains true to this date. Qatar, interestingly enough, has said, while they normally, pre-COVID did not fly at all to Brisbane, they have taken up Brisbane till the end of the year. Qatar has its own issues, obviously, them being the primary carrier for the rest of the world. Delta and United, in terms of getting to Australia, have been absolutely consistent. Their flights get there on time. Now, I think the issue still stands, right? When do you book the ticket? What kind of ticket are you booking? Those are all questions that aren't going to go away until those caps go away, realistically speaking. But in terms of, okay, if I book this ticket at the, book a certain ticket, business class, whatever it is, at a certain price, I am reasonably assured that the actual plane is going to go there, and that was the big issue, and that still is a big issue. Air Canada was supposed to start flying in June. It's now October, and still no word from them. They've actually pushed everything back to 2021. American Airlines is still projected to start flying out on the 10th of November. Obviously, a lot of people that have Qantas credits, if they booked the American flight through Qantas initially, they were able to roll that over. So a lot of the space has kind of gone to them. But at the same time, we don't know if that's actually going to happen. November 10th is still, 2-3 weeks away. So we have to wait and see how it's all going to work out. But as far as, what's a sure bet, Delta and United, if you can find space, that's a sure bet at this point.
Yeah, we'll include a link to that previous video, but to sum it up, essentially, with such a limited number of folks that are flying on the plane, they're looking to fill their business class, the more expensive tickets to make the trip more economical for them, and then selling economy seats if they are available. So the challenge is for folks who are purchasing economy tickets is that they may get bumped or be told that their flight is not available, given that someone in business has taken that spot.
And the business and the premium economy, and we've been able to find some premium economy at some relatively reasonable prices, right? And give you an example. I mean, I'm looking at a premium economy ticket in the right class of service for, $3,000, $3,500. It's not that bad, granted, but you wait, and then you're up to that highest tier of premium economy. All of a sudden, you're paying $8,000 for premium economy. And your business class kind of starts at 6,000 and 7,000 as it is. So it really shows you how the pricing tiers work, why timing matters, why being flexible with your dates matters. You can't. This is definitely not the time, and I think we kind of really elaborated that on the last video. This is not the time for someone to say, all right, I want to go to Australia 3 weeks from now. It doesn't work like that. We want to project out 2-3 months, if at all possible, to give everyone the time and the options that they need to be able to make good decisions. If you wait till the last minute, you'd be lucky if you can even get a $10,000, $15,000 ticket, just because the space is going quickly.
Turning our attention now, I know that we had spoken a week or so ago about some of the US consulates that are opening up, and I know that you'd looked at the different consulates around the world in terms of travel to and from. The challenge being that a lot of these countries have quarantine. Some of these countries have restrictions in terms of flights to the US, so you may be able to get there but not get back. And I think on balance, we looked at Mexico as probably the best option in terms of economic flights and the fewer restrictions, etc. Jamal, can you talk about some of the destinations, and obviously if someone is flying there, they'd want to understand, well, if I'm flying from my E3, I'm probably going to need 5 days, 3 to 5 days. I'm going to need transfer accommodation. Can you talk about some of the ballpark, without holding your feet to the fire, so to speak, some ballpark numbers on what someone would expect for a couple, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if you're looking at, New York City to Mexico City, I mean, obviously we have the nonstop flights. You get the one-stop flights, depending on when you book. But the nonstops are running more or less on a daily basis, which is always a good thing. Delta, Aeromexico, I mean, these are the carriers that run that. As far as cost goes, you're talking 5 nights in a hotel. If you go to Mexico City, which is obviously the main destination there for, renewing the visa, I think you can come to expect somewhere between at least about $3,000 for two people if you want to have everything booked, 4 or 5 star hotel. Economy flights, we're not going to go crazy with that, obviously, and everyone has their own preference, rightfully so. But just based on the entry level, you're looking at a door to door from the minute you leave your house to the minute you come back, at least about $3,000, and that's given with about a month, 2 months buffer in between booking and departure. If you wait till the last minute, obviously, Mexico, like every other place, they're going to jack up the prices, as it always was. It always was the case pre-COVID. Last minute flights, a few people had this misconception that if I wait till the last minute, it's going to drop. It's not the case in the 21st century, where air travel is, in such demand. But especially more so in COVID, when flights are tough to come by to begin with, just on a general scale. So definitely that buffer, it does help. And then the $3,000 price, like I said, that's based on 4 star hotel, economy flights, two people, transfers, door to door from New York City. Different cities, obviously different prices.
I know that there are also two other destinations we looked at, one being Monterey and the other one was,
Ciudad Juarez, yeah. Yeah,
right.
so Juarez is a much smaller place than Mexico City, as is Monterrey. Monterrey has a bit of a scenic appeal, but it's all the way on the West Coast. So for a lot of us on the East Coast, it doesn't really make sense to make the trek all the way out there, especially because, just the timing and the time difference, and also the cost. Ciudad Juarez would make sense because the consulate or the embassy out there is probably not going to be as busy as a Mexico City, which is, I know a lot of people have kind of preferred that because of that. But the flights getting there tends to be a little bit more complicated. You have to make a connection Mexico City each way, at least, So with that said, I mean, you have to venture through Mexico City anyways. Now, if you can't get an appointment in Mexico City, then okay, yeah, it makes sense. But I think for comfort, for convenience, and for cost, you want to stick to the major markets. You want to stick to your Mexico City because there's going to be tons of flights in and out on a daily basis that, one doesn't work, another one works. So you have options. And I think options is always what helps out.
Jamal, I know that some folks are watching this from the West Coast or closer to the West Coast. Would those other US embassies make more sense? And what would be the relative price if someone wanted to fly, say, from California to Monterey?
Yeah, if you're as far out west as California, obviously Monterey would be kind of the quickest place to get to. Cost wise, more or less the same. One thing we have to keep in mind is that when you go into these smaller cities, and they're not tiny by just definition, but relatively speaking, they are much smaller than Mexico City. Your choices in terms of accommodation, in terms of transfers, they're a lot less, right? So, but the prices, they don't unfortunately change as much. 4 star hotel is a 4 star hotel, and ultimately you get what you pay for. But yeah, it would make a little bit more sense in terms of efficiency, making it from California to Monterrey as opposed to California to Mexico City. If you're in, the South, Juarez would make obviously the most sense, somewhere in Texas, so on and so forth. But again, I mean, all three cities would be accessible from anywhere in the U.S. It's just a matter of narrowing down, based on what's most convenient for you, right? Based on where you are. So that's something everyone should keep in mind.
We spoke about this before. There might be someone who's never been to Mexico. They might be going by themselves and have some anxiety around that. If they speak with you, you can cover everything for them. For example, all the transfers from the airports to the hotels, the hotel bookings, You have no local knowledge of the hotels, etc. So if someone does contact you, you can sort of guide them through that whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been to Mexico probably more times than I can count, you know, and yeah, I mean, it is obviously a different country, but at the same time, it's not, you're not necessarily walking into a danger zone. Obviously, every place has its dangerous areas, America included, you know. But at the same time, you know, the places that we're all talking about, the U.S. government and obviously Australian government feels confident enough in those cities to be able to have their kind of satellite offices open up there. So for us as citizens and residents of the U.S. and Australia, it's totally fine to go there. Now, what you can expect in terms of tourism, that may leave a little something, right? Where somebody says, okay, I came to Juarez, but Juarez is just, you know, if you don't have family there and you don't have business there, there's not much else to do because it's one of those kinds of places. But at the same time, the good thing about Mexico is that once you're in Mexico, it's very easy to get to a tourist destination. You can get to a Puerto Vallarta, you can get to a Cabo, you can get to a Cancun, and you know, after you sort out your visa situation, you can give 2-3 days in one of these actual vacation destinations in case you are the type to hit two birds with one stone. You know, you say, I'm going out all this way. It's not going to add much cost to my flight. The hotel that I'm going to get is going to be an all-inclusive. So when I get to these places, I don't have to worry about food and all this and that. So there is that appeal as well. But again, the number one thing is that you're not straying too far from home, you know. So you're just a short flight back to the U.S. and it's a pretty sure thing at this point.
Right. And of course, they don't have the quarantine restrictions of other countries.
And that's the biggest thing. You know, I was just talking to somebody who got back from Mexico this weekend, and what she told me, she like, listen, I mean, everyone's wearing masks, they're taking the precautions, but unlike a lot of other countries, uh, you know, that have forget about quarantine. Obviously, that goes without saying. No one wants to be stuck somewhere for 2 weeks, but they have these testing requirements, and the testing requirements differ by country. Some countries require two separate tests. The big issue that we have in the US today is that not every state, not every city has all of these tests to offer. So all of a sudden you might be going somewhere where they say we need a you know, PCR test or this test or that test, and you go to your local, you know, clinic or doctor's office or so, what have you, and they kind of look at you confused saying, we don't have that. You know, we only have this one kind of swab test and that's it. And, you know, going to Mexico helps you to avoid that headache. I mean, again, it's all about just renewing the visa. It's a critical thing. It needs to be renewed. You know, doing it here, we all know how that works. You know, it doesn't really work in your favor. So just being able to take care of it in a quick way without having to worry about any of the COVID regulations, so to speak, it's a big thing.
Jamal, before I let you go, is there anything else that you feel is important for our listeners to hear in terms of updates?
Absolutely. And there's just one thing that I want to just stress and emphasize. It's that, you know, back when COVID first hit in March, you know, doesn't really matter how you booked, even if you booked directly with the airline, there was almost a freeze on refunds. So people have kind of been burnt in many ways. And what's changed since then, obviously, it's been about, you know, 7 months, is that the refund process for most carriers has been streamlined, meaning now it's just as easy as it was, you know, pre-COVID. If your flight gets canceled, you're entitled to get a refund, or you can be rebooked on another flight in the case of a schedule change. In the case of a total cancellation, obviously you don't have to take the credit if you don't want it. That wasn't the case in March anywhere. It wasn't the case necessarily in April. And then we've had the world put pressure on these guys, and you know, they actually reverted back to their initial policies, which is, again, I mean, it's a customer centric policy where, you know, you have these options. And I want to make sure that everyone understands that if you have a tough time when you book through an agency, whether it's online or with a person that you spoke to or whatever the case may be, it's not necessarily the airline. You might have just had bad luck with that agent or that agency. And that's where the actual person to person comes into play, right? So for me, yeah, I would always advise somebody to use an agent, but you have to ask these questions before you book anything. You have to understand what you're getting into. You can't just assume that the person on the other end is going to, have your best interest. You have to ask these questions. And if you like the answers, if you feel comfortable with them, then by all means, you go ahead, you book it. That's why I like to bring it up before the person I'm speaking to even brings it up, because it's the reality of the time that we live in, with the situations that we have, with the kind of problems that we have economically, so on and so forth. It just makes sense to let people know what their options are in case of the worst, in case everything goes right, in case they change their mind. They have to be informed before they book anything.
Well, Jamal, look, again, thank you for your time. I look forward to our next discussion, and hopefully there'll be a little bit more good news than we had in this update.
Thank you so much, James.
Have a great
Talk to you.
day.
You too.
Take care.